If a future historian looked back at this decade, would they see AI as the steam engine of a new industrial revolution, or more like a big bubble that diverted the leaders' attention and their budget without ever really delivering the value?
I'm old enough to having seen a number of IT revolution. I saw the PC revolution. I saw the cloud revolution. I've seen the internet revolution. It's never been about technology. It's always been about purpose, governance, and how agile we are at changing our operating models.
AI is making many things look easier. Interfaces are simple, answers are instant, decisions seem faster, but when technology makes things look simple, complexity rarely disappears. It usually just moves somewhere else. Today's organization, that complexity is moving inside the company into data, infrastructure, processes. People are trying to make everything work, and that raises a deeper question. What does leadership look like when machines are increasingly helping to make decisions? I'm your host, Greg Burke, and this is Leading in the Age of AI. We'll be looking at how artificial intelligence is reshaping leadership, governance, and decision-making at the highest levels. Today's episode will be exploring how AI often makes things look simple while organizations remain complex. Joining us today, Professor Philip Moscoso. He's a professor of operations, information, and technology here at IESE. He's also director of a program we have called From Executive to Board Member. For more than 25 years, he's worked with companies across industries on strategy, operations, and performance improvement. I can't say welcome to IESE, Professor, because you're already at IESE, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's great to be here.
And Amparo Moraleda, she's a board member, several different companies, Airbus, Vodafone, Maersk, among others. She's one of Spain's most respected board members with decades of experience leading technology in infrastructure organizations through major transformations. She's also a strong voice on ethics, complexity, and long-term thinking in governance. So I assume you're going to have a lot more to say about government and AI.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Let's start with a story. We all know how AI is not perfect. Let's look at it specifically in hiring. You know, Fortune 500 companies have been using these AI applicant tracking things, CV screening systems, and it looked great, but obviously applicants also caught up and started using AI-generated resumes, which just resulted in real complexity. And HR systems is sort of going back to the future, having to add additional review responsibilities and actual manual review. Let's go to you, Philip. You know, what's ease of use and ease of implementation with some of this technology?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. I think the example you bring in is actually very representative for a I think very fundamental challenge that the companies face with the adoption of AI. And actually, if you look at conceptually what is going to or already happening is that we are evolving from a situation where people, for example, employees, tend to use tools for helping them doing things. And we are somehow moving to a world where actually the agents will even do those things for us. So for the user, things will become easier. But what we call the abstraction layer, so what is behind what the user actually really sees and understands, is therefore becoming even more complex, because it's not only helping, it's even doing, planning, preparing, reviewing, and things that before were still in the hands of people. So the risk at some point with your CV example is that we need to understand that when we start to do this development, it will be not just handing over tasks from a person to a machine, so to speak, but a lot of other things will also change. For example, when there are interrelations between what was before people, is it going to be between machines? Is that what we want? And I think that opens a lot of new challenges that will require not just doing quick fixes in the processes, but really fundamentally think, how will a system or even an operating model work where agents will be an embedded part of the execution.
I find it fascinating that what's becoming easier for individuals is becoming, in many cases, harder for companies.
Yeah, I think the dream of every organization, especially if we are talking about business to consumer type of a business model, is really a world where there is zero friction with your customers, with your clients, where interactions are very, very easy, very lean, very, very smooth for the user. But again, we've seen it with the API world, when all the apps and all the systems in companies were APIfied. We were just putting a layer that seemed very easy to use, that was mobile ready. But all this appification drove a lot of complexity in the backstage of the companies, because systems were not fit for purpose, data latency was not fit for purpose. So there was a lot of investment that was required to make the infrastructure ready for this type of a new world. Now with AI, we are facing the exact same issue. We need to really be very careful about why we are implementing and using AI, what's the purpose for using AI, how the processes, the workflows, the IT infrastructure needs to be changed and transformed to be fit for purpose for that technology. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you also help the organization embrace those changes. I was recently with a team that was already creating agents to take over some of the tasks of the team. And they were talking about the onboarding of agents as they used to talk about the onboarding of employees. So how do you onboard agents within the organization, and eventually how you replace professionals by agents? And then you can imagine a department where agents are in charge, and where eventually you will only need a human in the loop to take over the exceptions and the situations that are not already kind of a frame and defined within your ecosystem. So definitely there's going to be a great change in our working environments, and all these concepts as onboarding of agents, control of agent work, how we prepare those humans in the loop, the kind of experience that those humans in the loop will require. All these speaks, I think, to process reengineering and to cultural change in the organization, which are usually key success factors for any major transformation.
You led to my question, which is, when you talk about so many agents and every once in a while a human being in the middle, what does that mean for a company's culture?
It means that there is a great effort to keep everybody on board this transformation. I think people are never worried or concerned about change. But people are always concerned about what does it mean for them. People are afraid of losing things. So you can try to set tone from the top. You can try to define a very clear strategy. But if middle management and the first layer of the organization is not embarked and cannot visualize how the future is going to be brighter for the organization and from themselves after this journey, you won't get the pace and the speed of change that you require. So a lot of change management, communication will be required within the organizations to make this a success.
Oh, I like hearing communication, because that's my field. Okay, so always to know that communication is going to be more important is a plus for me.
Yeah, but at the same time, talking communication, and we were discussing that in the pre-preparation of this podcast. The example of can be the CV sending, but can be just an exchange of emails. Where the longer the more, we often have this sensation that what you are getting as an email has not been written really by a person, but very essentially by a machine, in this case by an AI system. And if I start to answer with my own agent, at some point you say, okay, what is the implication of how communication will evolve? And to what extent is that the way we want to go forward? When is it efficient? But when do we still need to look how to keep personal relationships?
Yeah, I think empathy, authenticity, are really going to be so vital in this new world. I really appreciate when there is a typo in an email and when someone is not putting a lot of hyphens in the answer, because it means it's personally written. Yeah.
So you know what I appreciate even more than a typo? A handwritten note.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's just like, wow, people still do this.
That's the ultimate luxury.
It is, but it's the ultimate, I think, sign of like real human connection and appreciation
absolutely.
too.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
So, okay, this isn't the first revolution. You mentioned that as well, and I have to admit, I wouldn't be here today if there had not been the internet revolution, because I was working at Time Magazine in Rome. I had the best job in the world. I was the bureau chief at Time Magazine in Rome, and I thought I wanted to spend the rest of my life there. But the internet came along. Suddenly our business model changed radically, you know. And I had to go off and look for a job in television, which was a lot of fun. But anyway, so that was my experience with the revolution. But let's take a look. We have a really interesting interview for the BBC from 1999 about the revolution then.
I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think? I mean, when you think then about the
Is there
future
life
of it-
on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about.
Wow. So David Bowie, by the way.
Yeah,
But I think just a tool or an alien life form. What is AI, and where's it taking us? How do you see this?
I think it triggers some, at least on my side, some interesting reflections also in light what we are discussing. No, so the first is I think the feeling how difficult it is sometimes to really anticipate how a change will develop over time. And for example, it comes to my mind also very well-known examples like when Graham Bell somehow predicted, no, that at some point in every town of the world there will be at least one telephone, no, when he started with the telephone. What I'm saying is, first thing, it's difficult to really understand, and this happens also with AI now, what is the full extent of the change that we are going to go through. Second, it is true that things are going now faster than in the past, but still, I think society, companies will need time to digest, to adapt, to test and find out. But at the same time, I think it also triggers that sometimes some people think, well, this is just a tool, and it is much more profound what is coming.
I think the age of AI really lowers the entry barriers for many new players and newcomers, and especially in the services business. I would argue that for more industrial and long cycle investment companies, I think this is less disruptive, at least in the short term. But definitely everything that relates to services, B2C and mass customer interaction, I think is going to be hugely disrupted. But again, going back to the kind of large corporate environment where I live, it's never been about just technology. It's really been about how you integrate technology within your legacy system, processes and tools, and at what pace you can do that. For boards and non-executives alike, there is a big challenge of really understanding and apprehending this technology and making sure that we understand to what extent it can really contribute to value creation for our business, or also very relevant for value destruction, because definitely not understanding and not apprehending the impact of AI in our different sectors, can be an existential risk for our organizations, and therefore something that is at the core of the remit of administrators and non-executive directors. So very, very challenging times.
Amparo, you've said it's not really about technology. There are more important things here, and that's why we're here, to talk about leadership. But tell me why there's more to it than technology.
Do you want to take this one?
No.
You are the professor.
No, go ahead.
Oh, please, I'm looking forward to.
So, first of all, I would tend, on the one hand, to agree with the point you make, which is once a technology has really proven a value and it's helpful, it's really difficult to stop it. So in that sense, for example, we mentioned before, previous examples like cloud. I remember at the beginning, a lot of people saying, well, I never will put sensitive information like my pictures somewhere out of my control, And eventually, I think we're all getting used to this, And I think there are a lot of examples, or people say, I would never take a train without a person driving it. And now we are doing that very often. At the same time...
We're taking cars. I was just spent a year in California. We're taking cars without people driving them.
But at the same time, and the car example is very good, First, technologically, sometimes we underestimate the complexity. So it has taken many more years that some of the gurus had said at the beginning. I remember some people already 10 years ago saying autonomous car will be coming next year, and the next year has been the year after, and so on. But at the same time, let's take even a very simple example like radiologists. There are a lot of studies say, well, AI could do a very good job as analyzing X-rays or any kind of MRIs and things like that. But as of today, are we stopping in hiring or even training radiologists because we don't need them anymore? No. So technology is part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation. It's also how, as people in organizations, but even beyond, at society at large, how do we basically adapt to those changes? And that's often where I think, in the same way I'm agreeing with you, technology is core, but it also agreeing with Amparo, it's not everything, and sometimes it's even only the start. The important thing is how we manage afterwards.
Look, I think that a number of years from now, we won't have programmers any longer. We won't have programmers. We've seen, when I was in engineering school, I was taught how to write code in Fortran 77 and in COBOL, and I knew how to do codes.
I did Pascal. Does that tell how old I am?
Yeah. Let's not keep that way, because I think we are derailing.
I win, by the way.
Big time. Anyway, but we saw the emergence of languages such as Python. Why? Because it was almost like writing in natural language. Now we will be able to dictate the kind of code we want. And more important, it won't be just a translator from our language to COBOL to... No, it will be a translation from, some specification to machine code. And this will create huge savings in the organization. Does it matter that I don't know how to code any longer? Did it matter when, horse carriages were changed by trains? Did we lose a big skill by losing those guys who were able to just drive horse carriages? I don't think that's the case. The most important is how we are able to absorb that change and make a good use of the skills and talents that we won't need any longer. I think that's the big elephant in the room.
If I may take that point, and I think that there are jobs that no longer need to be done by people, so be it, And sometimes, actually, what we lose jobs here, we're going to win it somewhere else, But the challenge, at least in the midterm, will be if people no longer develop, let's say, the expertise by doing, for example, being it coding, being it analyzing the work of a radiologist, being it lawyers, junior entry levels. The question is, we don't need those jobs, but for the time being, we need the senior jobs, the senior people that have the experience to decide, they have the judgment to decide when AI is working and when it's not working well, And how are they able to take that judgment because they have seen a lot of the work that they have been doing as juniors. So one of the things that we need to think about is also career path. How will career path need to be adapted? How need companies to basically get the skills developed in another way? A way could be just by simulation. You don't need to basically work as a lawyer. You can, in the same way that the pilot can train, because a lot of things will be done by the autopilot, but the pilot still will need to be able to take over control when the autopilot is not working, no? So how are employees going to learn to take over when AI is not working or doing mistakes, no? And I think that triggers interesting questions that again show technology is at the core, but for organization, the challenges are much, much wider.
There's still a crucial moment when the plane is falling, right? And somebody's got to take over.
Absolutely. And again, I think you also bring a very important topic, which is how we just manage this transition, because I think we are in a kind of interregnum where we know that the old world is going to kind of disappear, but we don't know yet exactly how the new world will look like. And I think it's just leading in this kind of ambiguity that makes us really very, very uncomfortable and very unease and very, I think, insecure when it comes to lower levels in the organization. This idea of onboarding agents, what's the role of the human in the loop? But think of a branch office. In the past, people working in a banking branch offices were able to close the books, to close the status of the branch offices. They were completing the sheets of paper. They were sending it back to the central. Then we saw the emergence of the core bankings. No one any longer in a branch office now knows how the damn system works back. Even more, the people who program those core banking applications are all retired. I mean, so it's just thanks to AI that now organizations are able to just understand what this code was all about, rewrite the functional system that was developed 40 years ago, and now think to how to evolve those core systems. So we are not losing knowledge. We are just transferring that knowledge in kind of a repository that eventually we would be able to retrieve anytime we need it. But it's true that we will need less and less people being able to manage the complexity and the daily life of organizations.
Let's talk a bit about how well companies are doing implementing AI. There's this McKinsey study, State of AI, saying 2025, 88% of companies now report regular AI use, but only 39% say it's improving their bottom line, and that they've also had huge problems in scaling AI. What's the problem? Scaling's a problem. Management doesn't know how to use this tool.
Well, I think first of all, it is really a challenge, and it is not unlike we had challenges, for example, in my area operations with Industry 4.0 or Internet of Things, where initially there were pilots that were providing very encouraging results, but then when companies tried to scale it to the overall company, they were not able to achieve the same results, no? And that's not a very, I would say nowadays, very surprising thing, no? One thing is to make a successful pilot, and another thing is the general adoption, no? And also in AI, it will be, and it has to do a lot with, one thing is to work kind in a lab, and the other thing is then to work really in industrial practice. For example, when we talk a factory or an industrial company, you know? And in that sense, I think companies will need to find out, and actually studies are proving, no? When we look at individual pilots, there are examples where the results are very encouraging, but so far we don't have any kind of study that can really prove that AI is, for example, improving significantly the P&L, be it both on the cost side or on the revenue side, no? And even less, even there are one or two examples where people try to see an economic, broader national economic impact of AI. It also was very difficult to prove these impacts even with computers and the internet, no? Because at the end, this is not happening from one day to the other. So this is a more continuous thing. And then really in research terms, to prove that the improvements have been really clearly generated by a specific technology is very difficult, no? And this is something that companies will have to figure out how to really scale the application, and not just do quick fixes, but to end up really embedding the new technology, in this case AI, in their operating models.
How can some people, many of whom don't really know what's going on with this technology, be able to show leadership here?
That's a very interesting challenge. It's interesting to understand how we are trying to measure how different organizations are using AI. Back to your comment, I think we are trying to understand and measure what are the KPIs. We are trying to define what are the KPIs for AI, how it impacts the top line, how it impacts the cost, CapEx and OpEx line, and also how it also contributes to cost avoidance, not only cost saving. I mean, can we keep just growing without just increasing or just adding more people or more staff into the organization? So this for me would be the three layers: revenue growth, cost saving, and eventually cost avoidance. And we are trying to track it from these three different layers. And I fully agree that scaling innovation is a true challenge. I mean, coming from the test room to the daily life, I think we saw the same with big data. It's easy to capture unstructured data and take one action, but how you just are able to just introduce this next big event into your daily process and life, that's still a major challenge. So for boards, listen, boards are of course challenged and disrupted by this technology as well. Even if we have some of us have technical backgrounds, we are not experts. I mean, it's a fact that you get to the boardroom after an extended executive life, and by definition, you have not lived even the cloud revolution. I mean, we are people who come, as I mentioned before, from the PC age or from the internet age. It's not that technology goes so fast. So it's not that we are so old, but it's just that the technology goes so fast. But, what we're trying to do, we're doing different things. Sometimes certain boards have taken the path to bring younger AI experts. But, the problem is that those subject matter experts can only contribute when we talk about a very specific subject, which is AI. And their experience and exposure is less relevant when you address general and broader company topics. We are just trying to organize like training sessions on AI, but not really about the technology layer of the AI, but more important, how AI can disrupt your business model, your processes, your competitive ecosystem. And of course, it means different things for different companies. For Airbus, is really about certification, processes, safety, automating really the design and some elements of the production line. But when it comes specifically to safety, I remind you that every process in the aerospace industry needs to be certified, as each component of an aircraft in the aerospace industry needs to be certified. So to introduce AI in this type of environment means that you need to recertify all your processes. So it takes a pace. For Vodafone, who is a company who manages a critical infrastructure, is really about how AI will be able to still guarantee the resilience and the cyber security of the entire critical infrastructure. For banks, it means totally different things. You have to introduce AI while remaining very compliant with regulation and ensuring the protection of the data of all your clients. So AI means different things for every industry and in every company. So we are trying to make that effort to bring that education into the boardroom via subject matter experts and just via the different experts in the organization who are just helping us ramp up in that field.
I may just add very briefly on those reflections. I think eventually, and you know this very well, being in so many boards now for many years, at the end it's also very important about doing the right questions. No, as a board member, you are not leading anymore. No, you are basically responsible for the governance, and some of the questions are still valid with any kind of technology in any kind of company. For example, how are we able to improve our value proposition to customers thanks to AI, And I think a good board member will reasonably quickly find out if the answer is really having a foundation that makes you believe AI is adding value in the company, or it's just some way to say, yeah, we are doing things, And I think that's, at the end, again, talking the abstraction level, in the same way that a user doesn't always need to understand the full detail of what is happening in all the AI stack, all the layers of that stack. I think sometimes board members, they are not there to be the domain experts in AI, but to really challenge what does it mean in terms of business, of culture, even in terms of corporate governance, the implication of using,
Yeah, it's a common challenge for both executives and non-executives to frame it properly and to make sure that we are just implementing also the right governance, making good decisions based on solid data and accurate data is very important as well. But you need to make sure that the processes to produce this data are also sound and have the right integrity, because you need to be able to make sure that you rely in correct data to move on. So lots of different challenges. You can do the
calculations, but you need to know where you're going, right? You need to know.
And you need to understand how this data was produced.
So you gotta be able to ask the right questions, which I like. So
it's the business of making the right questions. Yeah, that's the.
Yeah, it is, right? You don't have to know every single detail about how it works, but you need to know, okay, where's it taking us, right? And what's it going to mean for our company? We come back to culture.
And where are the blind spots? At the end of the day, in such a complex world, you need to make sure that in light of a very significant decision or a very relevant capital allocation decision, you need to make sure that as a whole, the board brings around the table a big enough collective brain to avoid this type of blind spot.
It's a very good way of putting it. Where are the blind spots? Where can we get? Where can we
absolutely.
Get in? We're going to end with a few questions from our MBA students.
Okay.
Let's see if they ask the right questions and if we're any good at answering them.
For a founder in this day and age who is starting from scratch, fully leveraging AI, how do they build their organization, and what are the key differences for who they should be looking for to help them on their journey compared to a traditional organizational structure?
Should leaders be worried about the potential over-reliance on AI in the workplace?
How many people do you think will work for your company in 10 years?
Wow. Let me start with that last one, Amparo. You don't have to speak about any of companies you're on a board of, but let's say you're a CEO of a big multinational, maybe an insurance company, 100,000 employees worldwide. How many employees would you have in 10 years?
That's a good question. By the way, they would make really good non-execs. They are good at making questions. No, I think that every white collar needs to ask him or herself that question, even ourselves, how we stay relevant in the age of AI. That's probably the big question around the table. How our job description and our activity can be hollowed, carved out by AI in what we do and in the way we do things. If I translate what I'm seeing in the IT industry to this type of environment, I think that we could take off 30-40% of the jobs, white collar jobs. That's my assumption, provided you really encompass this staff reduction with the right process and governance type of a redesign. But again, I think it's difficult to predict. We will see. But it's a very relevant question. The other question I think we haven't touched upon is that when you think about how much it costs to do certain tasks with an agent that then has to use data, IT processing power, cloud capacity, energy capacity. If you add up the bill of what does it cost to replace a person by an agent, is now also being found out that it's more costly to do things with an agent than to do things with a person. So I think that we are not yet, we don't have such a fine understanding of what are the costs the full stack of the agent and the AI. Of course, it's proven through the Moore's law that the cost of the IT stack can decrease over time, but still in the short term, there are certain roles that have been proven to be more cost effective when performed by people than when performed by agents. So I think it will have a very, very relevant impact in white collar jobs, definitely.
I don't know if you liked either of the other questions.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take first the over-reliance, I think was one question. I don't think it's going to be so much about using it too much, but using it in the wrong, let's say, unreflected, not responsible way, no? And I think that's the big challenge that we need to find out what this specifically will mean in every instance, no? So that on the one hand. The other question that was about setting up a new company in this age of AI, no? I think this touches upon a lot of the things that we have been discussing in previous conversations. And essentially, I think the big thing is not to see it like a machine that you can just use to replace some specific things, but really to think from scratch as a AI embedded kind of approach, no? And being aware that there are challenges that were challenges before that will still be challenges. For example, scaling, no? People tend to think, no, now with technology, scaling is just pushing a button. Well, not really, no? And we have discussed about that, no? So at the end, I think it's really about understanding that technology is going to be a part of the equation, but it is an enabler that needs to be really embedded in the right way so that the whole organization can leverage that technology. Technology, we typically say it's not the mean in itself. It is really just to helping to achieve certain results, no? And at the end, you need to think about the people-machine interaction, the social-technical system. You need to think about how you adapt organization, but also how you interact with customers and so many other things that are still, at the end of the day, going to be relevant as they were before, no? So I think setting up a company will be in some ways different in the future, but in many ways will have similar challenges than before. And that's what we also see with previous technologies.
Same old skills needed in terms of creating a company.
And I would highlight trust as a key KPI and as a key currency for the future, because I think you can have systems that are 99% accurate, but if you don't trust the system, you might find yourself in front of an organization that you don't really trust. So you need to make sure that you understand very well how those data, how data has been curated, how those algorithms have been programmed, the biases behind those algorithms. And I think that also making sure that you invest in reskilling, retraining your staff, making sure that there is a kind of a good judgment and some objective critical thinking that is really nurtured and developed in the organization as you deploy and develop those systems. Airplanes run most of the times with autopilot, but then you need pilots able to take over when the autopilot just disconnects because it's not getting the data from the sensors outside. So you will need people able to take over and to understand, how to deal with exceptions. In the organizations, we need to make sure that people retain that ability to judge and
judgment is going to be key, definitely.
and to understand whether what the system is telling them is really right or wrong,
And judgment is human. It's not artificial, right?
Absolutely.
Amparo, thanks for that. I really liked that idea of trust. I think a great way to wrap this up, and Philip talking about reflection and the need to reflect before you go ahead running away with AI. Thank you both for joining us here on Leading in the Age of AI.
Thank you very much. I've definitely learned a lot.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks for having us.
Great conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.